second question, a little bit lighter, a little bit more almost philosophical. Keng Soon and I often talk about the Malayan identity, this amorphous, lost Malayan identity, in this parallel world where perhaps Singapore and Malaysia were still one country. And whenever we meet, I kind of ask him for his thoughts on this. So, what is the Malayan spirit that you grew up with, and what's your current conception of it, given geopolitical realities and developments? And just one small point to make about this question. It's something that Keng Soon talks about in this book, The Resurgence of the Malayan Identity, and he also frames it in terms of the need for greater regionalization, the need for Singapore to form better links with our immediate neighbors. So, what's the Malayan spirit or Malayan identity you grew up with, and what do you think it is today or might be today?
Okay, there are many dimensions here. My earliest memory was actually December the 8th, 1941. Okay, that was my birthday, my first birthday, and I remember the sound of the bombs coming in. Okay, and the whine of the bomb, and then the thud, and then the explosion. Right.
I also have a memory from 1 year old.
Yeah, exactly. This is So a lot of people say, that cannot be true, right? But I checked with my mother because I asked her what was the sandbags, because I remember the sandbags that were the whole family hid under the concrete staircase, you see, in a 2-story terrace house where we were living. And so the concrete staircase was, my parents thought was the safest place to be in the house was bombed, right? And it was surrounded by sandbags. And I said to her, I remember the smell of the gunny sack. Okay? She said, what was the smell? I said, it's gunny sack smell. And she confirmed it, you see. Therefore, it confirmed to my mind that I wasn't imagining it, because the smell of it, right? Yeah. Then of course the whole family then moved to Cameron Highlands, where we had a glorious time as little children. I was there from 2 years old to 4 years old, and it was you asked me how did you experience Second World War? I said it was a fantastic fun time. Yeah, we were farmers, we were growing food, right? And I remember very clearly, this is part of the Malayan identity, you see, right? It's the geography, the geography of the territory that kind of lived with me throughout. Okay? So the identity, after we left Malaysia in 1965 we left, and in the book I mentioned about my interpretation of why Lee Kuan Yew cried. I think you asked me that question, right? Why did Lee Kuan Yew cry? Well, first of all, I think Lee Kuan Yew is a very complex person, and you cannot really know what's going on in his mind. But I imagine that he cried because his Malayan identity was completely shattered. You see, because because he had fought very hard for the previous 2 to 3 years of why Singapore must join Malaysia. Because he's a Malayan, okay? And also his economic sense is that unless we have a hinterland, it's very difficult to have a negotiating position, a viable negotiating position with the Euro-American forces that, although decolonization had already occurred, right? But a new global order under the Euro-American order was already coming into force to kind of overarch over all the developments in the post-colonial world. So, Kuan Yew, being an intelligent person, must have realized that once you have lost your hinterland, you have lost your bargaining position, and therefore you have to become a servant of the Anglo-American order. And it is not in his character to be the servant of anybody. Okay? And I think that was what hit him deeply, and he was completely shattered by it. Okay? And a good friend of mine who has a record of Lim Chong-yu's. Lim Chong-yu was the only Malaysian leader that visited Kuan Yew when Kuan Yew was crying and hiding in a bungalow in Changi Point. You know, he was in a terrible state of mind, and he secluded himself in that bungalow for 1 month. And Lim Chong-yu visited him, and Chong-yu has a record, which my friend has a copy of, that he actually met him and confirmed that he was absolutely psychologically distraught. So when people say that when Kuan Yew cried, it was crocodile tears, that's absolutely not true. Right? It was a real shattering of his whole worldview, you know, and his whole identity was completely shattered. So I think that is that's him as a Malayan. Now the other part of the Malayan thing is the cultural identity part of it. Some of which I think has retained in our multiculturalism of Singapore, right? But before coming here, I was at the exhibition at the National Library of the 4 artists, the Nanyang artists who went to Bali. And interestingly, it was for these China-trained artists like Chen Wen-si, Chong Su-ping, Yu Kang, and several others. These were Chinese artists trained in Shanghai that migrated to Singapore after the 49, when the Chinese Communist Party took over China. They migrated, and being totally Chinese in their identity and their outlook, decided that they must understand and learn to appreciate the culture of Southeast Asia. Their main aim was, I didn't know this until I saw the exhibition, their main aim was to go to Malaya to find themes for the art. But because 1948 was the beginning of the emergency, they were not allowed to go to Malaya. So the next best thing for them, they went to Bali. And if you go to see the exhibition, it's an incredible exhibition because Liu Kang took 1,000 photographs, right, which Gretchen just discovered in a shoebox. She is the daughter-in-law of Liu Kang. And it was really, and they said very clearly in the write-up about the exhibition, which was in 1952. They had a public exhibition in Singapore, and they said that it was a huge experience for them, and they in a sense, they found the art, the inspiration of art for their art in Southeast Asia. So this was a very important thing. So I think the artistic tradition, and then of course you have the poetry, which I mentioned in the book, right, by Edwin Tambu, right, and a few other poets who wrote about that period. And then finally, the young Alfian Sa'ad, right, who wrote this fantastic volume, and this poem called Singapore, You're Not My Country, which is in the book. So he's, I think, one of the last young Malayans left, right? So when we left Malaysia and Singapore had to become a global city, right? We had to reinvent a whole identity, which is now, even till now, is in a kind of fluid state of, I wouldn't want to use the identity crisis as a term that describes the current kind of identity situation, but I would say that we are identity-wise rather confused. So when Habibie, the former president of Indonesia, criticized Singapore, calling it a little red dot, it's strange that suddenly this little red dot idea encapsulated the new Singapore identity. Because the Malayan identity was an expansive identity. It was a progressive identity, right? It had formative potential, right? But the little red dot is a kind of introspective identity. It's turning inwards to celebrate smallness as a virtue. So I think that we are in that strange situation, and I would like to hear some of your other views, especially from the younger people. What do you think of the Singapore identity now? You see, yeah.
Yeah, we'll take some questions and I might come back to that. But Alex just flashed a very interesting book. Can you just show that book which ties into what you just said? I hadn't even seen this book. So
this book by Christian.
So this is the book about the Nanyang
Nanyang artist, yeah.
Yeah, so flick through that later if you're interested. Yeah, did anybody want to jump in here with any thoughts?
I just want to raise a point. Even though we are part of, even though we joined Malaysia in 1963, but I thought we were treated as Singapore-born people, Singapore citizens, not Malaysian citizens. We had nationality, Malaysian nationality, but we remained as Singapore citizens. And I remember personally, 1965, once we declared independence, I went and played football. I was so happy we separated Malaysia because I thought it was becoming very racial. And then by the end of the year, they removed national language teaching. There was no compulsory national language learning. So Malay became a second language, just like other languages. Can you elaborate on this, the dual identity that Singaporeans had in Malaysia?
Well, there are all kinds of theories about why Singapore left Malaysia, right? The idea of the Malaysia, right, was a concept which was generated by Lim Chong Yu in Penang, and also by Lee Kuan Yew, right? They were very much for the idea of a multiracial Malaysia, and I don't think they took enough credence of the idea of Malay supremacy. And I think the Ketuanan Melayu as an idea was always there, and it became a lot more pronounced in later years. Right, and even today, Anwar Ibrahim has to deal with Ketuanan Melayu, because although Anwar is a much more communitarian idea, he believes in the multiracial, progressive, modern society, but he has to deal with the fact of Ketuanan Melayu. For those who do not know the term Ketuanan Melayu, Ketuanan means Tuan is boss. So Ketuanan means the supremacy of the Malay race. Okay, and supremacy of the Malay race had to be expressed in language, in culture, in the arts, in education, in business, in administration. So this was the overarching ideology that Kuan Yew, I think did not pay enough attention to it. He was impatient. He was a young fella at that time. He pushed very hard for multiracialism, and the backlash was incredible. There were several race riots, right, both in Malaysia and in Singapore, right, and that led to the total separation. Does that answer your question?
A couple of questions. So, we've become sort of a servant of the neoliberal global capitalist order from sort of 65 onwards. And do you think Kuan Yew, and I'll call him Kuan Yew since you're calling him Kuan Yew, do you think Kuan Yew actually had alternatives at that point in time, or did the loss of the Malaysian hinterland leave him actually with very few alternatives than the path that he pursued? So that's first question, and second question is, how do you see the current situation given Trump and the rise of China and everything else, which you talk a bit about in the book?
Yeah, I think I already explained that why he cried, right?
Yeah.
It was a traumatic experience for him. Being a pragmatic realist, he came to terms with it. And he, together with, I think the term Singapore as a global city in which the world is our hinterland, right, was a concept that was generated by, I think, was Rajaratnam. But it, I think, encapsulated the new role of Singapore very well, okay? And here is where it's very important to understand, and I try to understand it, why he went to the Kennedy School, Harvard Kennedy School in 1968 and spent 3 months there. Okay? I theorize that he went there in order to form friendships with the key people in the United States. And that's where he actually became a buddy of Henry Kissinger. And through him, he had entry into all the elite of United States, right? Because I think he knew that if you want to be effective within the Anglo-American order, you better have good friends at the highest level, right? I mean, he was practical and smart. But I expressed this to Professor Wang Gangwu, right? And Gangwu told me, no, that may be part of the thing. Because Gangwu said that he had friends in Harvard at the time when Kuan Yew was there, and that his friends told him that the real reason why Kuan Yew went to Harvard was to learn how to out-talk Goh Keng Swee. And I think we need to talk about Goh Keng Swee's role in Singapore, and particularly in the early formative years of Singapore, right? The kind of social democracy that was being promoted by Raja, by Toh Chin Chai, by Goh Keng Swee, and so on. So the emerging neoliberal order that was coming about, arising from, and there's a whole story to that which I slightly touched upon in the book, right? In the influence of Friedrich Hayek, the Austrian economist, who had tremendous influence over Milton Friedman, who was the economist in University of Chicago, who was the chief ideologue, economic ideologue of the Republican Party and they all had to read the Milton Friedman's books on the market economy, the reducing the administrative influence over market economy, right? Because there was always this tension between the social protection and market economy, right? Which social protection was pushed by the Democratic Party, and economic development, free market economy was pushed by the Republicans. And today we have this total upset where the corruption of the Democratic Party is being revealed by the Trump administration, right, which are the kind of ultra-right of the Republican Party. So we are now seeing this huge transformation in America, and which will have impact on the Euro-American order, which will have an impact on us. So,
Wait, so you do believe that the Trump administration is exposing genuine corruption in the Democratic Party?
I think the revelations by Elon Musk in Doge, right, it's hard to refute. Yeah.
Okay. I do know that you have a quote and photograph of Elon Musk in this book, by the way.
Yeah.